Hi, my name is Jason Major from Biblical Cinematic Universe. Today I'm going to review the film from 1953, Sins of Jezebel, focusing on the story of Jezebel and the story of Elijah from the Book of Kings. And it actually predates much more well-known biblical epics like the Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur, despite having some of the same religious story tropes. And I'll explain that as I go. So John Hoyt plays the narrator, which starts in the beginning of the film as this kind of pastor, minister in a black robe, kind of like an old traditional type of church, not Catholic church necessarily, but but him preaching and then telling you the story of Elijah, and then it goes into this narrative. And Paulette Goddard plays Jezebel, Edward Franz plays Ahab, and George Nader as Jehu. So it might probably not be actors who are familiar to most people. It starts with a pastor introducing the movie, and then we get into the past. In this version, not in the Bible, but Jehu has an affair with Jezebel. So Jehu's kind of portrayed as a godly man who gave into the temptation of Jezebel, as opposed to Ahab, who's kind of like a very passive man who gave into to Jezebel. Obviously, there's a lot like white actors in this film, and like Jezebel to me is portrayed more like Scarlett O'Hara from Gone with the Wind than she is like the evil queen from an empire. So if you're thinking like Jezebel being like an evil queen, like Maleficent from like one of the I know other fairy tales, but from the fairy tales of Sleeping Beauty or all these other like evil queen from like sword and sorcery movies or something. No, she's portrayed more like, to me, like the way her dialogue and the way she smiles and all that, more like from some sort of soap opera movie from the 50s. And that to me is humorous for me. So, like, I'll be going on telling you, like, I found this movie to be a fun movie. I enjoyed it, but I'm going to be honestly that there was some camp value for me. Might be for other people. For some other people, they might say, oh, this is a lower grade movie. The film is definitely low budget, and that's what appealed to me. There are religious movie tropes, like, for example, like I said, there's the bad girl, Jezebel, but there's a good girl, Deborah, who Jehu can choose later on. There's another religious trope that is in a lot of these Bible movies at the time, is that the obligatory pagan dancing scene, which usually is not that sexual or sensual by, like, today's standards, but usually involves things like belly dancing or a lot of, like, supposedly Middle Eastern type dancing. So in this one, you have the scene, you have a wedding, you have a wedding, and then when another funny part that I thought was funny when they're worshiping. So Ahab gives into like having the temple of Baal. I found it funny because when they introduce the idea of the priests worshiping Baal, it was more like, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be blasphemous here, but like, oh, Baal, we love you. And it was very much like a barbershop quartet. So it's like, if you can picture like a barbershop quartet singing like that kind of like, an in unison voice, like, oh, let's tell you this story. Oh, that's kind of how it was. That was kind of funny that was there, that happened. And then they have, like I said, the pagan dancing. It goes on for like 2 or 3 minutes. Doesn't really add to the story except it's pagan dancing. And then Elijah comes in. He might remind viewers of Charlton Heston, but I found it ironic that he predates Charlton Heston, but he's very much like Charlton Heston's presentation of Moses in terms of how he's like a prophet, like the way he speaks, like, thus says the Lord, that kind of thing, you know what I mean? So that's kind of interesting. Then we, of course, as in the Bible story, he predicts that there's going to be no rain. And one of the great lines I like this one was, what are you, a king or a piece of dust, that Jezebel says to King Ahab. I thought that was a great line. Lorib's advisor after this sounds like more, like I said, like a soap opera. I see you and wonder, what happened to that girl I knew who had love in her heart, I thought that was funny. Elijah is at Mount Carmel. We don't see Elijah kill the priest. That is off screen. Because they don't have the budget for it, I guess. But they have that big, Elijah. Well, for those who don't know, the priest of Baal are trying to worship all day. They don't get any results. And Elijah prays to Jehovah, and rain comes. Interestingly, in this movie, Jezebel is back at home going, "Oh, it's Baal who did this." And then when King Ahab comes, he goes, "Oh, dear, it's terrible. Baal did not bring the rain. It was actually Elijah and Jehovah." And then she's mad. Then after this, you have the priest of God is on the run, and he's hiding in caves, and they sort of more establish that Jehu is in love with Deborah, who's the priest's daughter. Then after this, her father, which is Naboth, the priest of Jehovah, he's accused of blasphemy, which is from the Bible story that, Jezebel accused him of blasphemy so that they could get the vineyards from him. And he's on trial, and he says, "If truth cannot save me, what can?" Which I think is a great quote and should be used for some time. If truth cannot save me, what can? And then it was funny the way it played out, because it's like this close-up of him getting stoned, and you see him being stoned, but it's almost like, imagine like the camera is only on this frame, and then right after he's stoned, in frame comes the chariot with Jehu and the driver goes like, "Oh, we missed it. We missed our chance." It's like, I just thought the way that played out was to me, kind of funny. Like, it's like, if Jehu had just been out of frame, you think he would have been yelling at them saying, "Stop, stop, stop, I'm the captain of the guard, and I command you to stop," or something, right? Movie then stops to go back to the pastor's sermon, and on first watch, I was like, "Is the movie over?" But really, we don't have the budget to show this, that the big army is gonna now, because Jehu's now gonna strike at Jezebel, and he's getting ready to strike at Jezebel. Then we see the shadow of the pastor. He steps out of frame, but then the shadow turns into the shadow of Elijah in the past, and outside the tent of Ahab, prophesying that you will die. So then that's when we don't see the big battle, except for like maybe a few seconds, and then it just says that a voiceover says that Ahab disguised himself as a soldier and then gets killed, right? So that's fun. So that's what I'm saying, is that these big action scenes it could have had, they didn't have the budget to do it, and so the movie's very short because of that too. It's almost like an edited down version for Sunday school, right? Then the next part is you see Elijah anoint Jehu, and Elisha is introduced in a non-speaking quick role, but we don't see Elijah going up to heaven in a chariot of fire like in the Bible. Deborah and Jehu are married, of course, and the attack on Jezebel similarly is only a minute long or less, not even a minute long, because of obviously because of budget thing. And Jezebel paints her eyes, acts more like a woman trying to convince her man not to leave him. So Jehu comes and says no, he's not going to turn back to Jezebel, and then Jezebel goes to the window. She gets hit by an arrow, and then Jehu's gives her to the soldiers, and says, she still was a queen of Israel. Bury her, and the soldiers are like, "We'll bury her," and they throw her out the window. That was funny, and then. We go back to the pastor, who says there'll always be an Elijah, and when he's done, and when he's done, he'll pass his mantle on to another, and has Elijah's cane, indicating the pastor carries the mantle of Elijah. Movie closes. I enjoyed this movie. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. As I said, if you're a film buff like me and you like older Bible movies, you'll enjoy it. Other people might see the movie as too campy, and because of them taking out important details, they'll say this is just subpar. So enjoy the movie for what it is. Until next time, bye.